episode of Conversations About Race, Reflection in Action with the Oakland A's. And every week, I swear, we have some of the best guests one could imagine having on a podcast, video podcast as well. So without further ado, allow me to introduce the illustrious Congresswoman Barbara Lee. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Taj. Good to be with you from afar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, our country is just under so much right now in terms of COVID-19 and obviously our pandemic of our community, of our Black and brown communities. And we have two major crises going on in our country right now. So how are you doing in DC with your colleagues in the movement and on the Hill? And how are things for you right now?
Sure. Thanks very much. Things, for me are, they're okay. Sheltering in place in DC. DC has been a hot spot, but right now it's not as difficult as California is, quite frankly.
Sure.
But masks, making sure we're 6 feet apart, hand washing, making sure we have hand sanitizers, all the health protocols that apply everywhere in the country, that should apply everywhere in the country, or apply here in Washington, D.C. And so, I'm more concerned about the frontline workers, essential workers, people, our teachers, our students, children, people who have to go out on the front lines. Some can shelter in place and do what we're doing, but that's not everyone. And so in Black and brown communities, my big concern is that they are protected and that and right now we're trying to get this HEROES Act bill, that they get that extension of the $600 in their unemployment checks, that they get another cash payment, and that we do the right thing by our businesses, our small and minority owned businesses. So my concern is for the good of the people who are really out there on the front lines. But thank you, and I hope you're doing well, Taj, and everyone on the team, and everyone in my district in Alameda County, and your family, because this is so family centered in
Right.
terms of this pandemic, that we have to make sure that we keep our families and friends safe also. So I hope you're okay.
Oh, thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, my family's doing well. And, we've been following the protocols. So everyone out there, please follow the protocols, wear your mask, please remain socially distant because it does help. So with that being said, tell us, if you could, where are things with the legislation as it relates to extending benefits, for people in need?
Well, just the terms in general with the legislation, slowly, but I say maybe surely, but the key provisions that we must have, the Republicans, quite frankly, don't want. And that, of course, the $600 extension in unemployment compensation, but also the state and local government. I mean, so many of our essential workers work for state and local governments. And so we put in, I think, over $1 trillion to make sure that our local governments don't have to file, like Mitch McConnell says, file bankruptcy, which he wants, and to make sure that layoffs don't occur, and that our state and local workers are protected during this pandemic. That's a big issue. And also in that piece, in the prior bill, it was only cities with 500,000 or over, and none of my cities in my district have 500,000 people. So this is essential for Alameda County and for all of the cities in my district. And so thank God our speaker is very tough in the negotiations. Some of the things they want to do is to release entities from liability if in fact the health protocols weren't put into place and a person gets sick. Well, how do you do that? You can't release any institution from liability if in fact they're not doing the right thing to protect their employees. And so there are many, many stickling points in this, but at least the negotiations are ongoing. And so that's always a good sign. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. So I've been here for the last 2 weeks moving at our appropriations bills, and we have a lot of appropriations in this HEROES Act for more testing and for more funding for our communities and for healthcare, community clinics and what have you. So I'm here trying to make sure all of our issues as an appropriator don't get dropped, and that we continue to push Mitch McConnell to do the right thing.
Amen. Well, we appreciate you, Congresswoman. So with that being said, we know you've been on the Hill for over 20 years, and you've been serving our community and our constituency for a long time. And many people are curious about your background, how you entered the foray of politics at the federal level in Congress, as well as your journey here in California in the Assembly. So if you wouldn't mind, Congresswoman, for a moment, just take us back down memory lane and how you embarked on this journey of social justice, of being a trailblazing Black woman. We want to know a little bit about your background and educate some of our viewers on who Barbara Lee is.
Thank you, Taj. Well, let me tell you, and I was on the Hill for 11 years working for our great warrior, Ron Dellums. And I was actually an intern during the Watergate era. So, you know, I am dating myself, but, you know, it's been quite a fight for racial justice and for gender equity. And gosh, I can just start very quickly with my birth. When my beautiful late mother was pregnant with me and she needed a C-section during, you know, for childbirth. Mm-hmm. And she went to the hospital. This was in El Paso, Texas, and they wouldn't admit her because she was Black. Mm. Now, the only way she got admitted, and this goes back to the horrible history of slavery and what happened with Black women who were domestic workers. My great-grandmother had been raped by a white head of household where she worked. Out of that, those rapes and the horrible things that happened to her. And she told me this story. She passed away at 100 years old. Came two children, my mother's mother and my aunt, my great aunt. And so my bottom line is my grandmother looked like she was white. And so she had to fight to get my mother into the hospital to say, this is my daughter. And they got kind of confused with the hospital, didn't know what to do. So they let her in thinking that maybe she was that she really was my grandmother's daughter. Mm-hmm. And so, but what happened is they put her on a gurney and left her in a hall, and no one tended to her. She became delirious. She passed out. Someone saw her and didn't take her into the delivery room. It was too late for a C-section. Took her to the emergency room, and she almost died. Okay, here we are now in maternal child rate in the Black community is about where it was when I was born. But what happened was they had to use forceps. And so I almost didn't get here at Taj. They had to pull me out, and I had the scar above my eyes until a few years ago. And so my mother almost died during childbirth. I barely could breathe when I got out. I almost died during that process. And so from day one, my journey has been about racial justice from day one as a child. And so born and raised again, El Paso, Texas. Then we moved to California. I wanted to be a cheerleader. And I went to San Fernando High School. And to be a cheerleader, there was a select committee, a little committee, very selective. You had to be blonde and blue-eyed to be a cheerleader. Now, what do I look like? I don't look like that. And I really wanted to be a cheerleader, though. And so this is how systemic racism works. So it was not said you're Black and you can't be a cheerleader. It was just that this committee said if you don't look the way a cheerleader should look, you don't become a cheerleader. So I went to the NAACP in Pacoima, California, and I talked to the president, and it was on work study, and he was my boss. And I, mind you, I was 14 years old, and I was on work study trying to help my family and going to school. And so I told him the situation, and he helped me organize and went up to the school and made them change the rules at San Fernando High School, where girls who wanted to be cheerleaders, and I mean, this was a big community, rah-rah. People were not happy, but Black people were, and Latinx community was. And so we made them change the rules at San Fernando High, where students who wanted to be cheerleaders, it was girls then, could try out in front of the student body, right?
Okay.
I tried out in front of the student body, and guess what? I won, and that was my first election at 15 years old. I won. I was a great cheerleader. And so that year, though, a Japanese American girl, Jeannie Tanaka, won. And so I broke that glass ceiling to be a cheerleader. And that, again, that was my first election. And so that was at 15, okay? So every time, every step of the way, boy, it's been hard. You know, Black people know, Black women especially know how hard it is in America to break through all the sexism and racism that we have to deal with. So I was determined, and my mother, God bless her soul, she was one of the first 12 students to integrate the University of Texas at El Paso.
Wow.
She was the first Black woman civilian at Fort Bliss, Texas. My mother, my dad was in the military, so he was overseas as a child quite a bit. He fought in 2 wars. And my mother and my grandfather was elderly, and my mother sometimes worked 2 and 3 jobs. She took care of us. She took care of my grandfather. And she told us from day one, you know, don't you blink if you don't think, if people try to make you think that you're not as good as they are, or that you can't do what you want to do. And don't blink because you're Black, and you better not blink because you're a woman. And my mother used to say to me, when I wanted to do something, and I would think, oh, I don't know, because I'm Black and I'm a girl. My mother stood up to me and she said, look, can't is not in the dictionary. She said, you look up and see. And she kept saying to all of us, can't is not in the dictionary. And so, you know, and now that I look back, getting involved with the Black Panther Party as a community worker in Oakland really helped formulate my political consciousness. Shirley Chisholm, I was a student at Mills College. I was on public assistance after a terrible relationship, domestic violence, the whole bit. So I was on welfare, raising 2 little boys. Shirley Chisholm comes to Mills, and I end up working in her campaign, a class I was going to flunk. But when she said she was running, I worked in her campaign because part of our course requirement was to do field work. And I wasn't going to do that for these white guys. And so she came. We ended up with Sandre Swanson and Sandy Gaines and Wilson Riles Jr. We organized the Shirley Chisholm Northern California campaign. We took maybe 8% of the vote in Alameda County. I had never been registered to vote because I didn't believe in voting. I didn't think the 2-party system had anything to do with my life. So I didn't vote. I was very conscious and conscientiously said no. You know, I was like, you know, Black Lives Matter, right? And that they don't matter in the political scene, so why should I vote? Shirley Chisholm convinced me to vote. Went on to Miami as a Shirley Chisholm delegate, got an A in the class that I was about to flunk. And the rest is history. I ended up working as an intern for my beloved, great Ron Dellums, then ended up moving into his office in DC for 11 years, chief of staff, came back, California. Then I started business for 11 years. I was a Black business owner. Facilities management. We had about 350, 400 employees. Then I ran for the assembly. Now, mind you, each time I had to break through stuff, right? So, but my mother said, can't's not in the dictionary. So when I said I wanted to do this, people were looking at me like, you've got these 2 kids in college. What are you talking about? How are you going to just leave a staff and go do this? I said, my mother said, don't tell me I can't do it. Well, I did do it.
Yes, you did.
So it's just kind of like, but I do everything I've done though, Taj, understand, it's not just for me. It's like, so other women and other African Americans and people of color don't have to go through the mess that I personally have been through in my life. And I'm not unique in that sense. Every person of color with the system of systemic racism so embedded in its DNA have to go through this in life. And that's why we've got to dismantle it, disrupt it, and transform this country.
Amen. Well, you know, I can say this selfishly as a former intern of yours in your office, working for Sandra Andrews and Jeffrey Thomas and some of your former colleagues. I see how hard you work. And I remember the campaigning. I remember the United Democratic campaign. It was you, it was Barbara Boxer, and Carrie Edwards. You know, at the time, we had 3 campaigns going on at the same time. That's when I was working for you. And I feel like a lot of people don't know how hard it is to be in these elected offices. And they see you on TV. They think, you know, you're in a bubble, so to speak, away from the foray of what's happening in the community. So if we could segue a little bit about Oakland, talk a little bit about Oakland, where do you think our community is? Where do you think the district is right now in terms of policy, in terms of reforms that you would like to see happen, hopefully with the new administration? But in light of where we are today, what are some of your aspirations for the district? and some of the policies you like to see come to fruition moving
Sure.
forward.
First, yeah, Taj, first of all, let me say how proud I am of you. And I always lift you up as someone who really used the opportunity in our office to do what you needed to do for yourself, to learn and to move forward, which also for the community. So here, Taj is the prime example of what I'm talking about, you know, but really. But the first thing, of course, we got to keep the A's in Oakland now, please, please, please.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so you know I got to say that after 50 years, come on, you got to stay in Oakland. So that's a priority, I know. And so we've got to do that. But also, we've got to deal with the challenges of housing and unsheltered people and evictions and figuring out ways that people can purchase their homes. Because that's the only way that most people of color and low income people can move into the middle class and can do some of the things that they want to do in their life. And that's through the equity in one's home. So we have to have, the moratorium. And I'm glad that Alameda County and my city is moving on that direction, because the feds still haven't. That's part of what we have in this HEROES Act, is to extend the, moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. But in the meantime, cities and counties have to do that so that people can at least survive during this period and then thrive once we're through here, which we have to build toward now. Also, with regard to the new administration, a focus on African-American businesses and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, because we have some great entrepreneurs in my district. And a lot of what has happened as a result of COVID is that they've lost their businesses and they were not making a lot of money, but they were doing great things. And I hope we can help sustain them through this period. And then healthcare, of course, when you look at still people who don't have healthcare in my district, and also poverty, childhood poverty rates in the 13th congressional district, comparable to Mississippi. Like Black and brown kids are like in the 28-29% poor. In the golden state of California, in my district, which has huge pockets of wealth and huge pockets of poverty. And so at the national level, I've organized a task force for years now, because no one would talk about poor, only the middle class, which we got to fight for, but we got to keep fighting for low income and poor people. And so in my district, I try to work with organizations that are lifting people out of poverty and try to, as an appropriator, make sure that the funding is there so that they can sustain themselves during this period. But we have got to address poverty and childhood poverty in a big way in my district.
Okay, that's good to hear that those are your priorities. And just to say this, on the African American business front, the chamber here in Oakland, African American Chamber, myself, Shonda Scott, Kathy Adams, Seth Butner, and many others have been working on a resiliency fund to ensure we raised $1 million, Congresswoman, to make sure that Black businesses had an opportunity to get funding, because a lot of our businesses didn't get PPP loans.
Well, I know.
Right. So what are we doing to help at the federal level to ensure that there's more resources that can potentially come down the pipeline for that particular issue? Or do we have to wait until the next cycle or until the next congressional cycle for that conversation to resume?
Well, we have more funding in for PPP in the HEROES Act, but let me tell you, it wasn't just about the funding, it was how our financial institutions are organized. And so what we had to do in the CARES package, the last one, was fence in about $60 billion that was specifically for, quote, unbanked businesses, a lot of businesses, 1 and 2 person owned entrepreneurs who don't have a large payroll. And so we had to, and don't have the relationships with the SBA and the banks. So we had to have a whole restructuring of that program so that community development financial institutions would be able to access these PPP funding, which they couldn't before. It had to be a big bank. And so they don't have to go through SBA, because in the past, before the CARES bill passed, they had to go through SBA to be able to even apply. And then if you go through SBA, they say, well, do you have a banking relationship with the banks we have relationships with? Well, no. So how in the hell do you get, how in the heck do you get into the PPP.
Right,
So
right.
it's about the funding, but it's about restructuring our entire financial system so
Right.
that Black businesses, I'm so proud of $1 million. I mean, that's unheard of,
Yes,
really,
it is.
in the
It is.
Black community in Oakland.
Yes,
And
and
so congratulations. And I
thank you.
know how hard you and Kathy and Shonda and Seth work on this.
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
historic.
It was a
And,
team
and
effort.
so,
It was a
yeah,
team
yeah,
effort,
this is,
Congresswoman.
it's historic. So we're going to try to do what we can do at the federal level and make sure that these community banks, which was, they were excluded from the first go round, included second go round, that these, and I want to hear from all, from the chamber, if it's working or not, just on the federal fund. With the second go round with CDFIs and community banks and all the other credit unions now are eligible for the PPP also. So it's a heavy lift, Taj. It really
Yeah.
is, because we're dealing with Wall Street and we're dealing with the big banks and we're dealing with those who historically have had a chokehold,
Right.
on lines of credit, equity lines, capital, the whole nine yards. As a small business owner, I was an 8A contractor. I mentioned for 11 years, so I know this world very well. And again, systemic racism, totally in the DNA of the financial institutions and the financial systems of this country.
Absolutely. Well, let's transition to another topic that is also plagued our Black and brown communities, even right here in our district, and that's environmental justice. You tweeted something out this week about environmental justice reform and making sure that our communities and our environments are clean, because I'm seeing a correlation between the rates of COVID in our communities, and then also understanding that our communities typically don't have the right air quality or the right methodology for safe drinking water and things of that nature, which cause harm to the body. And it seems to be that our communities, since they're not as well protected, we're more vulnerable to disease and pandemics such as COVID, as our rates are alarming, Congresswoman, across the country. So what do you have to say around the aspect of environmental justice reform and ensuring that we're holding regulators and businesses accountable to ensure that the environments that our communities are in are safe and healthy for them
Sure.
to
And
live?
and when you look at, just in my district, for example, look at West Oakland, there have been polluters
Yeah,
who have used the land in West Oakland for toxic dump sites. And I
right.
remember when I was in the legislature, I tried to get a bill and the polluters pushed back on it. They would just say, look, if you're going to cite in any of our communities, you have 90 days. Give us the right to know that you're going to be here so we can respond, and they didn't even like that, just a right to know that they're coming in. And so this stuff is really deep. When you look at lung cancer and asthma rates and all of the health and the diseases that disproportionately affect African-American and Latinx communities and the API communities, those diseases are directly related to pollution and
Right.
to water, the lead in water, and
Mhm.
toxic dump sites. I was born and raised, I mentioned, in El Paso, Texas, and let me tell you the story and why I became such a strong environmentalist as a Black young girl. In El Paso, we lived in the neighborhood, and El Paso has a very low African-American population, so we all knew each other. We all lived together. Well, the Asarco was a smeltering plant. They
Mhm.
cited, like, within a couple of blocks of our neighborhood, right? And let me tell you, darn near all of my neighborhood friends are either passed away early or
Mm,
are disabled.
mm.
Okay, my family, my grandfather, bronchitis, lung problems, my sister, multiple sclerosis, the young man across the street, all of my friends. I don't know how I escaped this, but
Mm.
everyone within those 2 blocks of that smeltering plant are ill or they died. And we know, and NPR did an expose and showed what happened. And finally lawsuits got them out of there, but that was after so many Black people died. And so from a child, I've had this passion to deal with this. And so in my work here in Congress, and also with regard, the island of the trucks down
Yeah,
at the port, I've
yeah.
been involved in so many environmental justice struggles in my own district. And of
Right,
course, I'm a supporter of the Green New Deal, which
right.
initially was really controversial, but now it's like, okay, everybody, should look at the Green New Deal, because what it does is it addresses climate change, but it also addresses environmental justice in a way that creates good paying green jobs and job training and healthcare provisions in it to clean up our communities and hold the polluters accountable for this. And that's a form of repairing the damage.
Absolutely. And Congresswoman, we appreciate your stewardship on this issue. And you may have heard, we briefed your office just yesterday on action that the A's have taken against polluters in West Oakland and filing suit against DTSC. And we're working with, you know, I would call her the godmother of environmental justice in West Oakland, Miss Margaret Gordon.
Margaret Gordon,
Brian
she's
Beverly.
kept me straight too, let me tell you.
That's right. Listen, she's been on me since day one, Congresswoman.
Oh, yeah. She's a wonderful, wonderful leader. And Taj, listen, thank you. No, Tatiana, I want to thank Tatiana, my district director, because she's phenomenal. And she keeps me up on everything. And she told me about the lawsuit yesterday. So, and I'm so happy that Margaret is helping you on this, because it's absolutely essential that we do this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's a step in the right direction, you know, not only for our community to see a major institution, you know, take action on a matter like this. And we're hoping that others will do the same, because you know, there are many large scale organizations in our community that also have a voice and people will listen. So let me tell you, just say,
I don't remember any other large entity such as the A's taking on the polluters in our district. Right. I don't know. I have to ask Margaret, but I really don't remember. When I saw this and Tatiana informed me, I said, "This is deep. This would set a new standard."
Why do you think that is? I mean, you've been in this area a long time. Why do you think that's been, you know, an issue with corporations and those who can influence not having taken action like this in West Oakland or East Oakland?
Well, it's hard to say, but the money. There's always a profit motive,
right?
And however it tampers with the bottom line is probably central to all of the reasons why. And then they all stick together, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
They all stick together.
Yes. Well, we understand. Well, we'll keep you updated. We'll keep Tatiana and the team updated. So we'll look forward to more positive outcomes in that area.
Thank you.
So absolutely. Let me transition to another topic of transformation that we've seen across the country. And that's removing these historically racist figures that have had statues removed and buildings renamed or schools renamed to ensure that we don't continue to protect the racist past of the United States of America and continue to move in a direction of repair and restoring what our Constitution stands for, Congresswoman. And locally here in Oakland, there is a petition to think about renaming Jack London Square. And your name has been associated with that being the replacement name. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would say I've been in a couple meetings because I'm on the board for the Jack London Business Improvement District. And we're taking this up as an action item because it's been brought to our attention that many people that we recognize in our community do not have histories of celebrating inclusivity and celebrating the rich diversity of our district and of our region. So how do you respond to that, Congresswoman, in terms of analyzing the DNA, if you will, of many places across the country, even in the Capitol? You know, we still have statues and monuments of people in the rotunda who don't represent the values of which our nation stands for. So how do you respond?
Well, Taj, this is across the country. A lot of it, and I thank God for the movement for Black Lives and the young people who are insisting that all elements and aspects of systemic racism dismantled from this country. And a couple of things. I did the legislation. I actually introduced it with Senator Cory Booker in 2017 to get rid of all of these racist generals and figures of the Confederacy at the Capitol, right? So we built some support for it, but not, members were a little queasy about it, you know, and it was kind of like, this is our history. So wait a minute, these were traitors also. They went against the Union. They committed acts of treason. And so I'm finding there are a lot of ignorant people who don't, well, I say uneducated, who don't even know the history of the Confederacy and what these people did and how they continued, even though we won the Civil War, the Union won, they wanted to maintain slavery. And they wanted to keep Africans enslaved in America. And they committed acts of treason. That's the history. So you don't honor these people in public places. So I introduced legislation to get rid of these statues. And, you know, minimal support. Okay, so I said, you know me, I'm going to stay with it, stay with it, stay with it. So I did it again this year. And guess what? We got it passed off the floor with bipartisan support a couple of weeks ago. And so now the statues, okay, are going to get to the Senate. I don't know what they're going to do, but in the meantime, to show you how this process works, Taj, because part of my legislation was you take them down, and if states want them back, because see, states get two apiece. So if states want them, they can take them and put them in a library or a museum or someplace where they can teach the history, the sordid, horrible history. That's okay. You just don't put them in public spaces to honor. So what has happened is now, because the legislation said either the states can take them back or we give them to the Smithsonian, they can put them in a basement and decide what to do with them. Okay. So these states now are beginning to say, give us our statues back. And then the people at the local level are going to tell them what to do with it. And so that just shows you how this process works. All this pressure of trying to get these statues out of the Capitol. Now, because of the movement, we got the bill passed. But also because of the movement of young people and the awareness of what these represent, now everyone's scrambling to get rid of them.
I love it.
So I was so happy about that bill.
Well, listen, Congresswoman, your staff is pulling you to your next interview. So we have, unfortunately, we want to come back to you and get more time and have another dialogue, because we got to talk about some more things. Reparations, 2020 election. But where can people go to find more information about you, your office, and what work you got right now?
Okay, just go to my website, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and please, and my office number, 510-763-0370, in case there are any cases, because we do a lot of casework with the federal agencies. So constituents, and I know Tatiana is going to be not happy me giving this out, but she knows, so she's a true public servant, that people are having a hard time with federal agencies, and my staff is phenomenal, so they advocate for agencies. And finally, on reparations, support HR 40. We have to have reparations to repair the damage. Support my bill. I'm a co-sponsor of HR 40. My bill, HR 100, sets up a commission like 40 countries have done to look at the whole, to bring forth a day of reckoning as it relates to the truth about 401 years ago, as it relates to bringing enslaved Africans to this country, and how that manifests itself today in the Black community and systemic racist practices, say, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic affecting Black and brown people, the murder of Mr. Floyd, the brutal murder of Mr. Floyd, how systemic racism is connected to 400 years ago, and how we've got to have this day of reckoning in this country. Got to have some truth telling so people really understand the context to move to healing, to transformation, which is reparations, and we got to get there. So please support HR 100 and HR 40.
There you have it, folks. Without further ado, the comparable Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be in touch with you very soon.
Thank you, Taj, and congratulations to you on everything you're doing.
Thank you. Love you.
Okay.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.